Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Spectrum, Every Age, Every Need. I am your host, Shawn Francis, and today we're going to get into something that, on the surface, the actual topic is important. There's nothing controversial about it, and there's nothing touchy about it um, at the core. But on the surface, uh, it might be simply because of the messenger. And today we're going to talk about being able to decipher a message from a messenger and uh, actually take a look at value for our children. I want to encourage you to keep an open mind and keep in mind that that is what the topic is actually really about. Though it might be easy to lose sight of that fact. But let's jump right into it on another episode of Beyond the Spectrum. All right, let's get right into it. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our community partners, uh, beginning with Billy Footwear. They are the makers of adaptive footwear for all. The story of the company is fantastic, but nothing compared to the story of the founder, Billy Price, who suffered a catastrophic injury his first week of college as a freshman and became paralyzed as a result and had to learn how to do everything all over again for himself. He was able to do so with the exception of putting shoes on. A prototype was built, Billy Footwear was born, and over 1 million pairs of shoes have been sold since, and countless lives have been touched. If you click on the link in the show notes, you can get 10% off your final purchase with Billy Footwear. Our other community partner is a fantastic company called Soul Grain. Soul Grain are the makers of some fantastic flavors in granola, and there's all natural ingredients, nothing added. And I always talk about how anything that matters to the general population matters to those of us who are caregivers in our community 10 times more so. And nutrition is no exception. And so when you're looking at foods that don't have additional fillers or harmful ingredients, Soul Green is at the top of the list, and their flavors are fantastic. There's a sweet potato pie, there's a banana pudding, and they have a new flavor that's coming out, I believe, this month as well. If you click on the link in the show notes and then you use the code, I believe it's BTS10, you will get 10% off your final purchase. And we want to welcome our newest partner, which is Meet B. That is MEETBEA. B is a behavioral and incentive aid, if you will, for those who are caregivers and we suffer various forms of burnout, whether you're caregiving for a child with a disability, an elderly individual, or someone that has an issue with substance abuse. What B does is it coordinates between the stakeholders, meaning the person that's being cared for, the caregiver, and any therapists that are involved. And you're able to fill a virtual wallet that the person who's being cared for has access to for a certain limited a time. And provided that they have met the requirements to receive those funds, then those funds are given to them. So it's meant to build a bridge between support, caregiving, and independence. And if you click on the link in the show notes, you will get 10% off your final purchase. So let's get right into, oh, I'm sorry, let me back right up. I also want to encourage you, if are, you or someone you know is a male and a caregiver or father to someone with special needs, a diagnosis, a disability, or the elderly, I'd love to encourage you to join us for our men's group known as the Den. We meet bi-weekly on Zoom. At the time of this recording, our next meeting will be a week from today. So it's every other Tuesday. and we meet from 4:30 to 5:30 Pacific time on Zoom, and it's just what it sounds like. The name was uh, chosen or created because a den is a place where usually you relax in a home, you're able to be yourself, kind of put your feet up. My good friend Brian Altudian actually came up with that name, and it's a safe place. You can come there and do not much more than simply introduce yourself, share as little or as much as you want, and hear people that have stories that'll let you know that you're not alone. There are more than I don't know how I want to say more than enough. I don't know what enough is, but there are a lot of spaces for women who are caregivers to bond and share hopes, dreams, fears, accomplishments, wins, losses, and things of that sort, and come together. Not only are there not as many places like that for men, but as men, we're not encouraged to do those things. We're expected to kind of just soldier on and be certain. And um, as men, we do that to a fault. So we're not exactly emotionally in touch. That doesn't have to mean that anybody's in touch with their feminine side, although I don't think that's a bad thing. But it's just about being able to have a place where you can be reminded that you're not alone. And I think that makes us better men. That makes us better husbands, better fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. So the link to join is in the show notes as well. You can fill that form out. There is no charge whatsoever. So, what we are going to talk about today, I have to admit that I kind of went back and forth as to whether or not I wanted to address this subject, um, because I think that the subject at hand is not something that I have any apprehension about. There's a risk of there being a misinterpretation as to what the real topic is. And um, what I'm interested in, and I think other people are interested in, is any and everything that gives us, that could give us an edge, um, an advantage, a gain, if you will, when it comes to planning for our financial future and that of our children. And as a father to 7 children, one who is 20 years old and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, and as a licensed financial services professional, that matters to me. And I am under the impression that it matters to other people as well. So, with that in mind, well, let me back up a little bit. Um, I understand that there are justifiable reservations with regard to anything when it comes to uh, Donald Trump. Okay. Uh, he's an individual that is, there's a word I'm looking for, not volatile, but very you're either love him or you hate him. There's some people that are maybe in the middle, and today isn't about any of that. And I'll be the first to admit that when I first heard about the Trump account, maybe because his name is on it or something, it seemed like a vanity, um, I don't know, a vanity play, so to speak. And it might turn out to be that over time. I have no idea. But what I did think about is that if there's any chance that there's anything of value, why don't I do some research, dig in, and kind of figure that out? And my objective here today is not to tell you whether or not you should invest in these Trump accounts. That's something for each person to decide, even as a financial professional. I always tell people that my objective is to put people in a position to make a well informed choice, not to make one for them. They may ask me what I might do if I were in their shoes, and then I would answer that. But as a professional, what I generally do is give some information for the purpose of education, then do some fact finding and let the client know that the information you share with me, how truthful that information is going to determine the level of potential value that my recommendation could be for you, whether you're looking at debt elimination, short term savings, long term savings, life insurance to protect against income, to protect against income loss, pay for final expenses. Or if you're now looking for a life insurance, which you just found out about this week, that offers lifetime tax-free income. These are all things that are out there, but not a lot of people know about. But at the end of the day, I'm to gather that information and not only look at the numbers, but also figure out what's important to you and what's important to you specifically. Because some people will say, well, I want to be wealthy. What does that mean? Success doesn't mean the same thing to all people. There's some basic things that apply across the board, but the greater the specificity, the greater the chance of achieving that goal or success. And so this is no different. My objective here is to gather some information, which I have, and put you in a position to make a well-informed choice. Now, I don't know whether or not my wife and I are going to take advantage of these accounts, um, but that's a personal choice for each person to make. And I think that, again, I talked about separating the message from the messenger. When the messenger is someone that most people would agree, no matter where they stand and how they voted, um, can be a little off-putting, to put it, you know, lightly. Um, and if you don't agree with the things that the messenger says, in this case, Donald Trump, and the manner in which he delivers it, and all these different things, you can right away brush off something just because he's associated with it. And I understand the temptation to do that. But in the interest of being the best parent, the best caregiver possible, I thought, well, if there's any chance that there's anything worthwhile about these things, I sure would like to know. So I did some uh, considerable research here, and we'll go ahead and share just the information, and then give some of um, my take as well. But I'm focused here on just getting information. So again, like I said, this is not about Donald Trump. It's not whether or not you voted for him. It is about separating fact from opinions, separating policy from politics, and helping families make informed financial choices. There's nothing like making a well informed choice. Unfortunately, I think many times we make choices um, without solid information, and many of us get what my dad would say is being wrong and strong. And this is to at least have you in a situation to be right. So, as we look at these things, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so what are the Trump accounts? Okay. Um, the, you know, and I'll be honest, the name can be a little bit of a, you know, I don't know, I guess I could say an advertisement. This is just an advertisement for him. So, again, try and look beyond that as much as you possibly can and just figure out, let's find out exactly what these things are and, um, you know, what the benefit of them could be, and if there's something to maybe be leery of, maybe that's something that's there as well. Have no idea. Okay, so let me see. So why don't we start with, okay, what the accounts are? They're federally backed savings accounts for children as part of the One Big Beautiful Act. Again, now when you see that, that again makes it 10 times more important to separate message from messenger. And when we're done here, we might agree that they're not the best thing for you. We might agree that they are just another opportunity or excuse to have his name in lights or uh, tied to something for his own posterity. Who knows? But if there's any chance, no matter how small, that there's something of value there or potentially of value, that's worth finding out so that we can each as individuals make our choices as to what, if anything, we would do with these accounts. So they're designed to encourage long-term savings and investing from an early age. And, um, you know, they are the talking points, include the overview as far as legislation and the purpose of the accounts. So they were actually created through federal legislation. That's the first thing. Um, and that's something that's um, worth knowing. Okay, and uh, if you look at who receives the government contribution? Does every child qualify? And can older children have one? These are the questions that I asked and that I wanted to know. So we'll look at eligibility requirements, birth year requirements, social security number requirements, the government seed contribution, as well as the contribution limits. Okay. Um, so the question that most people will have is, okay, will my child qualify? If my child doesn't qualify for the government contribution, is the account still worthwhile? Well, not every child qualifies for the government funded contribution. Um, I think one of the common thoughts out there is that every child automatically receives $1,000. I think I heard that a couple times before. But if we talk about how it actually works, um, let's look at this. So if you have a newborn that receives $1,000, let's say from a family member, and it remains invested for decades, the question is then, what could the compound growth potentially accomplish from a realistic standpoint? Um, so the one thing to keep in mind is that investment returns are never guaranteed. There are products out there that are index products and will guarantee protection of your principal, provided that the money is in that vehicle for a given period of time. But a general investment product doesn't have any guarantee. And because of that, that's the first thing that I would say one should consider, because there are vehicles and places where you can put your money where you have no limit to how much money can grow, but then you have no limit as to how much money can be lost. And again, making a well informed choice actually begins with being well informed as to who you are. What is your risk tolerance? How much can you afford to lose in a given segment or a given product? If you are of a certain age, if you're young enough, you have um, a minimal amount of responsibilities, you might find that you're able to tolerate some kind of loss for the shot at a potential great amount of gain. So you might want to consider something like that. If you're someone who is completely risk averse, you might want to look at a product that is either fixed in terms of the rate of return or something that is indexed. That is where the money has the performance is tied to a given index. Could be the S&P 500, the Hang Seng, the Euro stock, one of those indexes or the indices. And at the end of a given segment, your rate of return is based on the performance in that particular index. So you will have a limit as to exactly how much that money can grow, depending on what the account is. It may be some of them are as high as 13.25%. And the way they work is that the insurance or investment company makes anything that grows above that limit. But while there's a limitation, there's also a floor, meaning that you don't lose anything as far as your principal goes when that takes place. So the benefits of the accounts, let's look at what they are, at least on paper. Government seed money, we'll get into um, how one qualifies for that portion of it. But that means that there's a portion of money that's given by the government to start the account. The other thing is that it encourages investing at an early age. That's the one thing I will say is that we don't teach at a basic level as a nation the fundamentals of money and how it works. And what happens for most of us is that we grow up being a slave to money and it becomes in one way, shape, or form our master as opposed to the other way around. And if we can encourage investing at an early age, that's a good thing. The other thing is, again, it goes hand in hand, promoting financial literacy. And then long term compound growth, exactly what that looks like. I hope that's in here and the information that I have as well. But then there's simple investment structure. This isn't something that's very complicated. And it encourages families to think about wealth building. And the question then becomes if the program helps millions of children investing early, is that a positive outcome? I would say yes if it does that. But again, That's a big if based on everything that we're going to go through here. So the every financial product has trade-offs. So and life insurance is a financial product, whether it's term or permanent. I'm using that as an example because life insurance, I think more than any other financial instrument or vehicle, is one where I hear people, especially professionals, well, professionals and lay people as well, that have these die hard decisions or impressions as to which type of life insurance is the best. Not only the best, but certain ones that nobody under any circumstance should touch. And I always feel like one should be leery of a person who says you should never get so and so, you never get A, always get B. And if both A and B are products that are vetted by our government and gone through a certain level of regulation in order to be put out in the marketplace, chances are they're not necessarily all bad, and it's more a matter of each having its strength and weakness, pros and cons. There is no one product that I know of that I think everybody should have. There's some that, I think apply to most, and at the very least, there's benefits that I think most people could, uh, most people, there are things from which I think most people could benefit. Let's put it that way. Uh, but every financial product has its trade-off. So, looking at the trade-offs and the limitations or drawbacks when it comes to these Trump accounts, um, let's look at some of these things. So, looking at the questions that critics may have raised, or should families be cautious about it? There's limited investment choices. That's one thing. There are long-term restrictions, and then like any product that's out there, there are tax considerations. And so as a result of that, it's not appropriate for every family. Um, one of the things that pops up here is political controversy as well. But I really think if you're focused on what's best for your objectives for yourself and your family, the political controversy is something that's not as big a deal, even if it, in your estimation, the thought is that if I'm going to be associated with anything that has anything to do with candidate A or B, or in this case Donald Trump, um, it better be pretty damn good. At least that's the way I understand that thinking. So, can good policy become unpopular because of politics? Can bad policy become popular because of politics? I think both are possible. So, what I want to do is then, let's discuss and focus on uh, us, if you will, as in terms of a special needs family or community. So, the question asked is then, should every special needs family open an account? My first instinct is to say no, uh, because everything is a case by case basis. One of my favorite authors, especially when it comes to financial books, is a guy by the name of Morgan Housel, and he has a book called. It was got several, but the first thing I read from him is The Psychology of Money, and it resonated with me because I think that we have a money psychology. I think we have a money language, and not everyone's language is the same. The way you were raised dictates whether you speak the language of the saver, the investor, the spender. Um, you know, all those things matter. And Hazel has a new book. I think it's The Art of Spending Money, and he said that I saw him on a podcast where he said that his publishers were upset with him because in the book he didn't give instruction as to what someone should do. There wasn't any how to. And his response was, I don't know everybody's situation. So I'm not going to give any answer for something across the board. What applies to one person might not for somebody else. And I appreciated that so much because in this day and age, there's so many influencers out there that, you know, one are not always in the best position to give somebody advice because you don't know if they're practicing what they preach. But then number two, outside of being kind to people, treating people like you would want to be treated, and things of that nature, not everything is across the board, outside of just basic, human needs. The way people derive those needs depends on the person. So again, there's no financial product that is appropriate for every family. The decision as to whether or not you would take part in these accounts depends on your SSI eligibility, Medicaid eligibility, the family goals altogether, estate planning, the existing assets that you have, and then long-term support needs. Because the truth of the matter is, the accounts could affect those things, and so financial planning should be driven by the decision and the information. Again, a well-informed choice, not a political opinion. So, can the account or accounts affect SSI or Medicaid? And the answer is potentially it could. So, because SSI and Medicaids are means tested programs, families should understand how future ownership of assets or distributions might affect the benefit eligibility. So, that again is something to think of. And it's an area where professional guidance is essential. Happens to be part of what I do professionally. But the other thing I would say is, you know, the government has a ton of vehicles out there for us as citizens to take advantage of in order to save, grow, and earn money. And when I make that statement, most people probably think of government programs like WIC, food stamps, um, some kind of financial support or welfare of that sort. But the tax code by which cash value life insurance exists, that was created by the government, right? The manner in which insurance and investment companies operate, that's determined by the government. So while most people wouldn't put that in a category as a resource that's available to us by way of the government, it technically is. But what happens is, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do know it's not a mystery or a fact or a surprise that the government doesn't always let us know about the things that are available to us. So this is one of them, but that's why I think there's tremendous value in being able to put money in places where it doesn't affect benefits. And not only are you doing that with what you already earn, but there's immeasurable value in exploring other ways to earn money that make you less dependent on the traditional vehicles that the government provides, such as WIC or food stamps or even SSI for that matter. It's a very worthwhile thing to, I think anyway, to have a target and a goal to get as independent as you can from the traditional vehicles, that are out there. Now, some situations just call for that because, it's tough out there. And in our community, the divorce rate is higher than it is elsewhere. So there are many of us that are not, like myself, part of a team with a spouse working from a united um, front, if you will, and many single parents out there trying to make a way. But at the end of the day, that's why I think that we should be looking at every resource that we possibly can. Put it this way: if we don't take advantage of a resource that is available, we should know that we don't qualify for it, or that it doesn't really fit and help us with whatever our objective might be financially. So, how do these accounts compare to an able account? Well, the account is supposed to create general wealth building, long term investing, and it's not disability specific. Um, it's interesting what you find online when you do your research when it says general wealth building. I guess that remains to be seen. It is for long term investing. So the bullet point that I would stick with more than any is the fact that it is not disability specific. I think that's the biggest difference between it and an able account. And then the able account is not designed for one to grow wealth per se. It's specifically designed for qualifying individuals with disabilities and helps to preserve eligibility for certain government funds and designed to pay qualified disability expenses. Those are the biggest difference between the ABLE account and the Trump account. So they have different purposes, and one does not necessarily replace the other. Again, it's up to each of us to decide based on the information that you have whether or not that's something you're going to pursue. Will it complement the ABLE account or any other vehicles that you have, or is it something that just isn't a fit altogether? So in many cases, people will be asking, well, which account is better? I don't think that's the question that really serves. I think the better question is, which tool solves my family's unique needs? Because everybody's situation is different, as I mentioned before. So the next question that may be common is, what is a special needs? Well, when is a special needs trust still preferable? And what does might that have to do with having a Trump account? Well, the answer is that it doesn't have anything to do with it, and that a special needs trust is still preferable and still something that most people should have, especially especially when, excuse me, parents or caregivers have significant assets. And I would even challenge that. I don't even know if the assets need to be significant because you always say that if you don't have a plan for your money, the government does. And I always like to revise that by saying if you don't have a plan for your money, no matter how much or how little you have, the government has a plan for it, right? So that's where if you don't have the trust in place, you then go to probate. I know from personal experience that probate can be long and expensive. Um, I had an uncle that left some real estate to myself, my brother, and my cousins. And um, he had a will. He didn't have a trust. The will went into probate. Probate lasted 10 years. And when that happens, the money that is in that will can be eaten up by legal costs to work your way through probate. And there's no telling how long probate will be, especially where I am in California. But in my case, you know, that was in the Virgin Islands where I'm originally from. But still, the point is, probate lasted 10 years. Probate lasting 3 to 5 or maybe 10 years is not unheard of. And in the state of California, probate is even more expensive. And so what happens is that money could be eaten up. So essentially, I like to say that a trust is a whisper, excuse me, a will is a whisper from the grave. If you don't have any plan in place, not only does the government have a plan for your money, but then there's no say that you have because you're now deceased and those wishes have not been established before you pass away. If you have a will, you at least have a whisper from the grave. What I mean by that is that a will can be contested and can and will have to go through probate. Probate could be short, it could be very long, especially if there's people that want to contest it. But if you have trust, a trust is more like a scream or a yell from the grave because it's louder, it's very specific. It is not able to it avoids probate. So it's not something that will be challenged the way that a will would. Um, so special needs trust applies when parents have assets, I would say, of any kind. When grandparents plan to leave an inheritance, a special needs trust applies. When you have life insurance that is going to be used to fund future care, a special needs trust is needed. And let me touch on that one for a second. Life insurance being used to fund future care. That's another one of those uses for life insurance that most people don't think about. Some people have evolved a little bit because they're aware of the way that life insurance has changed. But when most of us think of life insurance, we still think of something that pays for final expenses, um, funeral, maybe leave a couple dollars to the family, which has tremendous value. But not only are there living benefits like long term care and tax free income that you can actually pull while you're alive, but it can also be used to fund future care. And again, because it's in the shell of a life insurance policy, that takes place without any taxation. That is tremendously huge. And um, if you have a lawsuit settlement that's involved, the special needs trust comes into play. If there's long term control over distributions um, that need to be addressed, the special needs trust addresses that. And then it also, again, protects government benefits as its primary objective. So the question is then, for some people, can a family use all three? Special needs trust, the able account, and the Trump account? The answer is absolutely, depending on each person's situation. So some families may benefit from one of them, some families may benefit from all three because each serves a different purpose. Again, good planning, coordinating the tools rather than trying to choose one, just looking at each one individually and figuring out what are the benefits of this? Does this meet our objective and take care of our needs? And that's where, again, you sit down with a financial professional who works in this area in particular. Um, Again, that is me, but there's other people that are out there. The main thing I would say is just, you know, and this isn't to pitch my services. It's to um, educate people about the need to have those things addressed. And as much as I would love to, from a business standpoint, be the person that helps you with that, I am licensed in multiple states, work in every state in the union. That's all good and great. But as nice as that is, the most important thing is to make sure that that's being done with someone that you trust, regardless of who it is, a trusted professional, um, quite frankly. So, looking at our continued effort to separate fact from fiction, some people will say, well, it's free money for everyone. Again, especially people that believe that there's $1,000 that everyone gets to start with. So only certain eligible children qualify for the federal seed contribution. That is the amount that is given up front. And so as a result of that, it is not free money for everyone. Um, there's a free starting point, so to speak, or a starting point for those that will qualify. The other thing that's being said is by some people is, well, it replaces an able account. Well, that's fiction as well, because as I mentioned before, it does not serve the same purpose as an able account. So it is not meant to, nor will it successfully replace an able account. We also talked about the special needs trust. It does not replace that because it also has a different function. And going back to the idea that, well, everyone should open one because it's just, free money, regardless of the reason why. If someone thinks that everyone should open one, um, financial planning is a very personal thing. So, as a financial professional and a caregiver, being a parent to a child with autism, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everyone should open one because, again, it's a personal decision that is hopefully made based on a well informed decision. And so, the idea should be judged on its own merits, not on the fact that Trump's name is attached to it. It is very silly and naive to think that because his name is attached to it, it's just got to be a good thing. So you should just go out and get it. And then by the same token, it doesn't serve you to assume that because his name is attached to it, it's a bad thing. So I have nothing to do with it. I understand that temptation, but again, I think that that's where there's so much value in being able to separate the fact from the fiction. Look, if you do your due diligence, or even if this information here helps you, and you find out or arrive at the conclusion, and you were open-minded all along, and you arrive at the conclusion that no, that's not for me. I don't trust that. I'm not going to do that. Then there's a difference between that and an uninformed choice or decision. And I think those are things we just have to think about. And so the questions that everyone should ask themselves is, what is my goal for this money? And you should think about what the goal is for all of your money. Every one of our dollars should have a purpose. Think about what that means. Like, I make general statements about, hey, putting your money to work for you as opposed to the other way around. But you should designate purposes for your money. You know, I think money has its own language too. Um, Growing up, I would hear of money that is associated to either successful people in my local community or maybe my favorite athlete or entertainer or something like that. And that's a certain type of money. Like, that's good money. That's the kind of money that I want to make. Just like there's bad money and blood money, money that's associated with ill-gotten gains and, you know, obtained by um, an immoral or corrupt um, venture of some kind, right? So that's why I almost feel like money is almost like a living entity and a living thing because it has such an impact on what we do with that which really does matter the most, which is our time with the ones that we love. So the other question that one should ask is, can it impact my child's SSI or Medicaid? Again, you should find that out with a professional, because in some cases it very well will do that. And do you already have an able account? Should you establish a special needs trust? How does it fit into your long-term financial plan? Again, this, like any vehicle, no financial vehicle is the end all and be all, nor is it the one and only tool that you should have in your arsenal or your belt. It should be full of diverse things that serve multiple purposes. And the question to then ask is, are you sacrificing your own retirement savings to fund this account? There's some people that get into situations like that where they sacrifice themselves, because as caregivers, you know, on one hand, our biggest challenge is to, like any parent, strike a balance between teaching our child to fish versus giving them fish. And like I said, if there's a divorce involving you're a single parent, that's twice as much of a juggling act. And it's even more difficult when you have to choose between caregiving and retirement. Or is your thought, I'm just going to work until I die? And do you know what plans you'll have in place for your child when you exist only in memory? All those things matter and should be taken into consideration when looking at something like this. And so then the question should become, have I spoken with a qualified financial professional? And I think that's the key and operative word there, qualified financial professional, because there's a lot of financial professionals out there. But what kind of experience do they have as a caregiver or working with the caregiving or special needs community? The other thing in terms of qualification is working with someone that is or has access to a um, uh, oh my gosh, a someone that is a fiduciary. That matters. It does matter. But what matters even more than that is that the person you're working with has a fiduciary mentality. Excuse me. For those not familiar with that word, a fiduciary is someone who legally, based on their status or classification and license, is compelled to do business in the best interest of the client. And when I got into financial services 20 years ago, I thought that was a very strange thing. I was like, you mean there's like areas or designations that don't include a fiduciary designation or title? Under what circumstance would it be okay to think, well, you don't have to work in the client's best interest because your title doesn't require that? That's one of the weirdest things. That's as strange to me as the fact that a trust is open to probate. I mean, a will is open to probate, but a trust is not. Why do we have a legal instrument that could have you go to probate anyway, right? So I don't claim to understand the logic behind all the rules in financial services. I just know what they are and continue to learn even after 20 years and use all of them to try and implement what I can for the betterment of those that I serve. And going back to my point about just being able to work with somebody you trust. Look, Bernie Madoff was a fiduciary, but that didn't really change anything, right? So the titles matter, but the person matters just as much, if not more. So the other thing to ask is, okay, can we separate the message from the messenger? Would we view the information differently if, um, I don't know, let's say if President Trump's name or Donald Trump's name was not attached to it? Um, how much does that get in the way of one being able to objectively look at the information and say, okay, how does this um, possibly work for me? Does this, can I do something with this? You know, we can't ignore when people do things that are corrupt and don't serve the general public. We can't ignore when people do encourage or support things that disenfranchise, attack, or marginalize a particular group of people or any people based on race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, whatever the case might be. By the same token, we have to make sure that we are as vigilant as possible and open to seeking answers, regardless of where those sources come from. You know, and after looking at all of this, I still, like I said, I don't. I think there's even a little more to look at um, in order to determine, what one might do with regard to these accounts. Um, but I'm hoping that today's conversation didn't tell you what to think, because that's not what any episode is designed to do. That's not what the show is about. It's designed to, I hope, help you think a little more clearly about this topic, or any for that matter. For instance, take ABA. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and the way they described it is they had a bad experience with ABA, and it didn't work for them. And I thought that was one of the few times that I've heard about a situation where they didn't like the outcome or the result of their experience with ABA, but did not say that ABA was bad. I've heard so many parents in the caregiving and special needs community, especially in the autism community, say that ABA is horrible. Um, it's a bad thing. It's, and they give a list of reasons why, as opposed to what their experience was. And that's why, like I said, I think there's more value in putting people in a position to make well-informed choices. Look, like I said, I got multiple licenses over a 20-year span, and I'm still going to sit down and tell someone when they sit with me as a client in my financial services business, here's what you have. If you do A, you're going to get B. If you do C, you're going to get D, more than likely, right? Based on all of these things, based on the things that you want to accomplish, based on what we've discussed, which do you think makes the most sense? And even in a case where I feel that what they're choosing is something that I don't agree with, I'll still make sure that we are in agreement, that I've explained to them, I don't know if I would advise doing that, because here are the ramifications for doing something like that. Is that something you still, want to do? At the end of the day, making an informed choice is what matters. I had a client that I met with recently who has a parent that has some health challenges, is older, and is not going to qualify for traditional life insurance. And the only thing they will qualify for is something that is called guaranteed issue. Guaranteed issue policy is little to no medical questions that are asked, and the issue is guaranteed, provided that you're approved. So it's very rare that something like that is denied. But because it's guaranteed issue, those policies are designed for people who are in a real bind and have a hard time finding um, life insurance. It's almost life insurance's version of a subprime loan, if you will. Um, that might be a little harsh, because subprime loans were completely predatory. So I'll give a caveat. It's not quite that, but you don't have many options because you're not going to qualify for too many things. And so the things that are available to you are usually guaranteed issue, or other companies that have products that are similar. And what they usually do is they carry a very limited death benefit. In other words, the amount of coverage, it's very low. And if the insured passes away within the first couple of years, you don't just simply get the death benefit. You might get a portion of it, a portion of the premiums paid, or something like that. And that might sound kind of underhanded or sinister or something like that, but it's explained, it's all there up front. And the life insurance company is taking a bigger risk to insure that individual. But the point I'm making is that this individual wanted to make sure that some coverage was better than none, and they wanted to you know get that type of policy because it's the only thing that they could get, and it gets them closer to the financial objective while still far away from it. And I wasn't sure that it made sense financially for that to be done. So my job is to then have a discussion that has them acknowledge that I don't know if that's going to be met if that path is taken. But my job at the end of the day is to, again, provide information so that people can make informed decisions. That's the way I operate professionally, and then at the same time, um, that's what the show was created for as well, even in the areas that aren't my that are even further away from any kind of expertise. So the information that's shared in this episode, it's intended for educational purposes. It shouldn't be considered individualized financial, tax, legal, or investment advice. Everybody's situation is completely different. And again, like I said, there's tremendous power in making an informed decision. And now if you take the topic of these investment products off the table and just think about separating messages from messengers, um, I think there's tremendous value in that as well. Also, look at the message that's received first and foremost, and then take a look at the messenger, no matter what that case might be, because questions are a little more powerful. I think a lot more powerful than statements, and it's easier to make a statement um, or judge. And I know there's some people that are going to see this and decide to come for me because they're thinking that um, what I'm doing is giving too much grace to Donald Trump. But this isn't about Donald Trump. This isn't about any candidate. This is about two things. From a macro perspective, this is about looking at these accounts and is there any chance, great or small, that they might benefit your family? If that's the case, then then you have a choice to make. If you're going to not take advantage of something that could benefit you, it should be a well-informed choice that you knowingly walk away from it. And then at the same time, if you find out that no, this is going to upend our benefits and it doesn't work and it's not in our best interest, then that too is a well-informed choice or decision. And there's a couple things I didn't address, which I'll get into at a future date, is exactly what does the rate of return look like? Exactly, um, exactly what does the rate of return look like? We talked about the risk, but there's a little more detail on what the accounts are like in terms of how the investment itself actually works. What type of contribution might you need to make if you want to make a certain amount by a certain time? And I would touch on those in a future episode, provided that that's something that people want to know about. Again, like I said, I felt I was taking a chance, even touching on the subject, because I imagine somebody's going to come from me for doing what they think is supporting the administration, which I'm not. That's not what this is about. Um, but I think it's a chance or a risk worth taking if people arrive at um, well educated choices. So, with that said, I want to again thank our community partners, Billy Footwear, Soul Green, and Meet B. The links for each can be found in the show notes where you can get 10% off your final purchase with Billy Footwear, 10% off your final purchase with Soul Grain, and then 10% off your subscription with Meet B. And again, if you are a male, you or someone you know is a male who is a caregiver or a dad to someone with special needs, a disability, or the aged, consider joining us for a bi-weekly gathering on Zoom known as The Den. The registration link will be in the show notes as well. And if there's a topic that you would like to see discussed, something that you want to add, you can feel free to reach out to us at uh, change the world at beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. I know that's a mouthful, but that was what I was able to find when we registered the domain. Again, that is change the world at beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. And that's where you can email us And then the website is beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. You can find all our episodes there. And you can also find them on our YouTube channel and on most platforms wherever you get your podcast. So remember, questions are more powerful than statements. Let's try and be more childlike, less childish. And everybody needs the same thing. We all need the same thing. We need to be loved. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to know that we matter. We've got some great things coming up, and I encourage you to stay tuned to look for those things. And like I said, if there's something that you think we should be discussing that we have not, something that you want to hear about, this show is created for you. Feel free to reach out and let us know. You can do that in the comments or at any other resources or outlets that I just mentioned. And to everyone within the sound of my voice, I'd like to thank you, let you know that we love you, and thank you to the women in my life without whom I would be nothing. And that includes my wife, my mom, my aunts, everyone, all the women in my family. You're very special to me. Remember, you're not alone. You're one of us. We love you. Thank you.